Before going any further, I'd like to have folks on the line introduce themselves if they would like. I'd like to start with Rebecca and the lead agency folks. Rebecca, could you introduce yourself and introduce folks from the lead agency?
All right. My name is Rebecca Jim, and I'm the executive director for lead agency. And I'll just let people around the room speak up.
I'm Martin Lively, Grand River Keeper with lead agency.
Hello, I'm Laurel Smith. I am a cultural geographer from the University of Oklahoma, Department of Geography and Environmental Sustainability.
And I'm Lucas Freeman, Vista with lead agency.
Okay.
Carl Hayes with lead.
Oh, go ahead, Carl. So sorry.
Oh, just Carl Hayes with lead agency.
Okay. Anyone else from lead? Okay, how about any other community members on the line? Okay, well, let's, hearing none, let's turn it over to EPA folks. Maybe we start with EPA Region 6 folks on the line. If you could just say hi and introduce yourself briefly.
Hi there, my name is Sarah Goyer. I'm on Tar Creek OU5, and which is the Watershed operable unit, and I'm also the lead RPM. I started with EPA about a year ago. You're almost coming up on a year and a half. Hi, everybody.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Anyone else from EPA Region 6? Okay.
I don't believe any. No, just me.
Okay, all right, great, thanks, Sarah. How about let's turn it over to EPA Region 7.
Hi, Liz Hagenmeyer. I'm a section supervisor in EPA Region 7 for the staff that are leading the investigation on the Missouri and Kansas portions of the Tri-State Mining District watersheds. Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Elizabeth, thank you.
Hi, and this is Elizabeth Kramer. I'm the Community Involvement Coordinator for the Tri-State Mining District sites and other lead mining and smelting sites in EPA Region 7. Glad to be here. Thanks for coordinating.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Did we get all the EPA folks on the line? Okay. All right. Is there anyone else that I missed from either the community or EPA? Okay, well, with that, I will turn it over to Sabrina and Carmen to introduce themselves. Sabrina?
Sure. My name is Sabrina Foster, and I work with SKIO on the Technical Assistance Services for Communities contract with Eric and Carmen. I'm relatively new to the Tar Creek site, but I am interested in listening in and learning more as part of this conversation today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sabrina. Carmen?
Well, hello, everybody. It has been a year since I've spoken to you folks with the lead agency. This is Carmen King. I can't believe it's been a year. I'm the technical advisor for the lead agency on the Tar Creek site. Glad to be here. Just a little bit about my background, because I don't know if I've met the EPA folks directly entirely. I've got 33 years of experience as an ecological risk assessor in the Superfund programs, and I've worked on a number of sites, watershed scale sites, so I'm fairly familiar with these type of stomping grounds. And I've also been a community member that's lived within the footprint of two Superfund sites, California Gulch and the Bonita Peak Superfund site. So I bring to the table, so to speak, knowledge, intimate knowledge of what it is to be a community member within an affected area, as well as a scientist that's been running around collecting data, interpreting it. So that's why I'm with the TASC program, and I'm very glad to be here. With that, Eric, should I get started?
Carmen, I think you should go ahead and get started.
Okay. All right, everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking about the Upper Spring River Basin Remedial Investigation Feasibility Study document. We've been hearing about this document for a considerable amount of time, 7,000 pages worth of data and information. So we're going to go through it tonight, page by page. Just kidding. Everybody still there? Okay, no.
Thank
No,
you.
Oh, that's a good one, Carmen.
Okay, I'm sorry. No. I have actually three areas of discussion I want to present tonight. I'm going to give an overview of the document, and strictly an overview. And then I want to talk about considerations that this document has for the Tar Creek Superfund site. Since lead agency is intimately aware and familiar and invested in the Tar Creek site, I'm going to discuss the considerations that this document may have for you folks. And the last topic will be the comments that I generated when I reviewed this document. I reviewed this document hopefully with the eyes of lead agency concerns. And so that will be where we wrap up. And these documents are strictly for your consideration. So that's what we'll end up talking about in detail, and they're for you to take home, tear apart, use as you will, or ask me as many questions as you like. So let's get started about the document scope and summary. It is a big one. Everyone is very familiar with the Tri-State Mining District, which this figure directly from the document depicts. All 4 Superfund sites that comprise the Tri-State Mining District are shown here. However, the Upper Spring River Basin captures only 3 of them, including Cherokee County Superfund site, the I can never say this. I always say Oronogo, and then the Newton County Superfund site. The Tar Creek site.
Oronogo is correct.
Oronogo, thank you. Good heavens. I'm going to slaughter that a few more times. I apologize up front. But 3 of the 4 Superfund sites are within the Upper Spring River Basin that we'll be talking about tonight. Tar Creek does not fall within it, but it is hydrologically connected. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna try. I knew this was gonna happen. Can you see my cursor floating around?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. All right. This is also a figure taken from the document, and it depicts the Remediation Investigation Study area. It is a very complicated area. It's very large. Like I said, there are 3 Superfund sites contained within it. I knew this was going to happen. Sorry, my cursor triggers the slides leaping around. This red outline right here is the Upper Spring River Basin outline. So this is the area that is contained within the document. It's a very large area. Let me describe some features within it. The light brown areas depict the designated areas where heavy mining activity has taken place and what we are concerned about. Within this area are tributaries, which are the lighter blue, that feed into the Spring River. Spring River is depicted as a darker blue because it has larger flows and it is a larger system. So you stand back and you look at this thing, it is very, very big. It is very, very complex. And this is something that I also am a chemistry teacher, and to describe chemistry concepts, I will take to my poor students a map like this because they love my job. They love what I do. And I describe to them that I study the environment and we try to remedy issues like the contaminated metals. And so I will give my students this picture, if you will, to and tell them, hey, your homework assignment is to go out there and go sampling, which they would love to do, capture surface water, capture sediment, get some soils, because your job is to tell me what these brown areas are doing to the surface water and to the sediment. And at this point, some of my students might quit, but some of them might actually step up to the challenge. Fortunately, the EPA did step up to the challenge, but you can consider why, or this is a formidable challenge indeed. This is a very large area. The watershed approach on Superfund sites is it's not a new concept, but it is a concept that I've seen evolve over the course of my professional career. When I first started in the early 1980s and we ran into a hazardous waste site, we were all so proud of ourselves. We'd go running out and say we would come out to one of these light brown sites and we'd scoop up the entire source area. We'd pat ourselves on the back and we'd go home and we'd call that a good job done. Well, we found ourselves going back year after year because we forgot things like what is the connectivity of those brown areas to those surface water drainages. This mining activity has been in place for years and years and years. And so it has, over the course of time, affected adjacent areas and adjacent systems such as streams and rivers. And while we can be proud of ourselves to go stomping out there and close up a source area, we have not looked at the watershed scale implications. We didn't look at what was downstream. And that is an approach that we need to do these days for sites as complicated as the Tri-State Mining District and for numerous NPL sites, period. We can't just look at the sources, we have to look at the possible effects to the drainages. So that is what EPA and others have done. They have taken this huge map of concerns and watershed characteristics and broken it down into bites. Makes the previous map a little bit more, or excuse me, less complicated. But what you're looking at, this figure also taken from the RI, breaks the study area down into watersheds. And this is the approach that we need to take on sites like this. It enables us to focus in on every tributary, there we go again, every tributary and its influence to a main stem stream. So if you look dead center in this figure at Spring River, big, strong blue stream that's depicted here, as it moves from right to left, that is the flow. You'll see that there are other light colored streams that come into contact with Spring River. For instance, let's pick on the very dark green area, Cow Creek. Cow Creek drains into Spring River. So Cow Creek would be considered a tributary to the Spring River, and it would be considered a possible source of transportation of mining materials, mining waste, mining concerns into Spring River. So what the EPA and others have done in order to get our arms around this huge basin is to break it down into these watersheds that you're looking at. Now the question of trying to determine where is the contamination and how bad is it is all of a sudden within reach. Because now you could take, let's just pick on Center Creek, the bright yellow in the center. Now, if I gave this to my students and I said, okay, hey, go out there and collect surface water, sediment, and soils to tell me the nature and extent of the contamination, that's an easier homework assignment by far. And I would design something so I would look at the entire footprint within and around the mining district and ultimately what it would impart or release to the Spring River. So this watershed approach, these bites, every one of these colorful polygons, this in essence shows us the format of the RI approach. Like I said, we've got to make this huge area within reach and start sampling so that we can understand what's happening. You've got to make the sampling make sense. You've got to understand the relationship of all the features in relation to each other. So for instance, Center Creek releases to the Spring River. Cherokee Creek is its own watershed. It is also a tributary that releases to the river and so on. So the document, when you break it open, you will find repetitively in each section that there will be descriptions of data and results by these watersheds over and over again. We will talk about the Upper Spring River, then we will talk about Center Creek, then we will talk about Short Creek, Shawnee, and so forth. Remember, the goal of this is an RI, or a remedial investigation, and we'll touch upon what that means. The goal is to gather enough data so that we understand the contamination throughout the basin. This document basically describes all the data collected to date. And it's very thorough and it's very large, like I said. So let's dive into the sections, the components of the document. Has 12 sections, 9 appendices, and a whole lot of data. Section 1 is the introduction. 2 describes physical characteristics of the RI study area that we just looked at, all those colorful polygons and watersheds. And section 3 describes site description and history. I'm not really going to touch upon these first 3 sections because they're very qualitative characteristics. So if you want some good information about climate, the geology, the history of the mining, these are wonderful sections exactly for that. But I'm going to jump full on feet first into the data, which starts with section 4 and carries through to the end. But first, let's talk about the introduction. What does this document cover? As we already described, 3 of the 4 Superfund sites within the Tri-State Mining District are captured within the Upper Spring River Basin. They include Cherokee County, of course, Newton County, Oronogo-Duenweg Mining Belt. Does not include Tar Creek. However, down gradient of the Upper Spring River Basin is the Lower Spring River Basin, of which Tar Creek is a part of. So the information gathered and gained from this entire document is useful and important to Tar Creek and the lead agency. The document describes the contamination within the mine-related wastes, such as tailings, and it characterizes the contaminants of concern, lead, zinc, and cadmium in soil, sediment, surface water, groundwater, and other mine features. The RI study area includes watersheds, like I said, the watershed approach, including Spring River, Center Creek, Turkey, Short, Shoal, Cow, and Shawnee Creek, as well as Empire Lake. Now, the objectives of the RI are fourfold. The primary objective is to determine the extent of heavy metals related to the mining activities within the Upper Spring River Basin sediment, surface water, mine drainage areas, soil, floodplain soil, pits, ponds, seeps, and fish tissue. Oh my goodness. This is a huge task, huge. This is why this RI is so large. The data alone was just enormous. All of these media was sampled extensively throughout the entire basin where they were available. Another objective of the RI is to document the findings from previous sampling efforts in the Upper Spring River Basin. A lot of agencies and entities have gone out and taken samples and studied various aspects of the basin. Some of it's useful, some of it's not. Some of it's very dated, some of it's very recent. Regardless, EPA went through these historic studies to find the useful data and use it as part of this document. The information gathered through the RI activities was used to update and refine what is called the conceptual site model. You folks probably remember this from some of our previous discussions. But a conceptual site model describes the fate and transport of the contaminants and ultimately shows us how people, humans, and the ecology can be exposed to the contamination. It's a very strategic, very important tool that we use in the Superfund process because it describes for us the exposure pathways that we ultimately need to focus on and try to address when we understand the contamination. Also, a part of the RI is to identify gaps, data gaps. It could be that after all these years and all the data gathered, there's still data that we need. And in fact, data gathering through the RI process is really quite iterative. It can go on and on. The RI process in a Superfund process can often be the lion's share of the time that is required. So just to revisit, where are we in the Superfund process? We are in the characterization, this second colorful block in this process. Remedial investigation and feasibility, this is where we take the data that's all been gathered to date, try to understand it. If the data is sufficient and it tells us where the contamination is and how bad it is and how much risk it creates, that takes us to the next step, which is selection of appropriate remedies and the development of a record of decision. And on down the road, we go towards cleanup. Like I said, the RI and the FS are very timely. There is a lot of work and a lot of interpretation because for sites as large as this one, when you gather some data, it may provide some answers, but it may also reveal more questions. And back out to the field we can go. Okay, so like I said, what I wanted to jump into as far as this document, sections 1 through 3 are really good background stuff if you want to understand history and site setting characteristics. But starting with section 4 gets into the meat and potatoes of the data. And section 4 summarizes previous investigations. And what I've copied over here on this slide, straight out of the RI document, are the primary 8 studies that were folded up into this document. And they date back to 1986 with an RI effort. All the way through to 2019, USGS has conducted numerous samples. This is all very valuable data, very useful. However, and I'm dating myself again, back when Superfund started, our ability to analyze and understand contamination was okay. Our instrumentation, I used to work in a lab on GC mass specs and atomic absorption units. A GC mass spec back in the 80s would occupy a room, an entire room. It was huge. And the data that it would generate, well, was kind of suspect, but we had to start somewhere. These days, a GC mass spec you can take out to the field and install on a stream side. It is just amazing what we can do these days. The same for inorganic analysis. Back in the 80s, well, it was okay. Now it's great. So when we look at these previous studies, we have to look at them very closely as far as data quality and data usefulness. And EPA did do that. They looked at all these studies to make sure that the data is of sufficient quality, it is accurate and precise, and can be enveloped into the RI. Section 5 gets into the EPA Office of Research and Development monitoring. This is comprehensive monitoring that has been ongoing since 2014, and it is watershed scale, multi-year scale sampling of sediments and surface water through the Tri-State Mining District. And I'm going to show you just an example of a figure. What you're looking at on this slide is just a bite of this. Oh my gosh. This is figure 5.5 out of the RI document. And what it is showing you is just a slice of the sampling that the EPA ORD folks have done. This slide focuses on surface water sampling over the course of 3 years. And you can see their sampling is fairly comprehensive. They capture a number of the tributaries, Short Creek, Shoal Creek, Shawnee, all of them, as well as numerous locations on Spring River. So it's very comprehensive, and it's like, wow, it's almost dizzying. And there are numerous figures within the RI that show you year after year of data results for each contaminant of concern. What we are looking at right here is strictly cadmium. There are more figures that show lead and zinc. So there is an abundance of data just from EPA ORD. So let me back down, because I want to walk you through what some of this data is showing us. Like I said, this singular chart on this slide is just a bite out of that large figure I just showed you. And what you're looking at is cadmium in surface water on Short Creek at one location. There's a little line that's connected to a yellow dot in the upper right corner, shows the physical location on Short Creek. And these are the data results for cadmium in surface water over time. So if you look at the white box, the SWSC2, that is strictly nomenclature. That is the name of that sampling location. And then the yellow line that is squiggling all over the place there is showing what cadmium will do in surface water over time. So let's just start far left. You'll see that first point on May 31st, 2019 is about 1.1 microgram per liter. And you think, well, great, what does that mean? Okay, well, look at the red line. The red line is what is called the background threshold value. So that's background, meaning water quality typical to the area, something that you would expect in clean streams throughout the district. And that is about 0.5. So that result on May 31st, 2019 exceeds background. So this gives us an indication, yes, indeed, Short Creek's got a problem. Cadmium is showing routine issues over time. Now those hiccups and jumps, those peaks and valleys and so forth, those are probably related to flow. When there's high flow events and there's gushing water coming down the stream that perhaps carries contaminated sediment, you might see these peaks of cadmium, maybe even lead and zinc in relation to flow. And this is what EPA is trying to achieve over time. They're trying to understand when is the worst time of the year when contaminants like cadmium are carried down these tributaries, because that helps us start to focus, where do we need to look? Because at high flows, when water is gushing down these streams, it's probably picking up sediments and maybe shoreline soils, and that's adding to the contaminant load. So this is useful information. It tells us that we need to look closely at Short Creek during high flows, perhaps in particular, which means maybe we've got mobile materials like the sediment and the soils. And what we can also do, if you look up there with the yellow dots, there's another location just to the left. What I would do if I was interpreting this data, I would look at the difference between these two charts and try to understand, well, which site is worse than the other. And to kind of get an idea, is contamination loading over distance? Because these two locations, if you look at the map, are within brown areas, which means they are both within mining district affected areas. So they both can be affected by mine releases. Okay, hopefully everybody's following me so far, because we're doing a lot of analysis as we're going through this data. But again, this is the EPA ORD monitoring, which looks like this and has been ongoing since 2014. It looks at surface water, sediment, pore water, and I believe some soils. And it has these locations routinely, so their sampling is really robust, numerous sampling events per year, and it is ongoing. Okay, section 6 of the document is data gaps. Even with all those historic studies, even with the EPA ORD sampling, it is a large area and there are gaps. And so there were tentative gaps identified associated with sediment and surface water in certain locations, some mine drainage, floodplain soils in particular, pits, ponds, some seeps, fish tissues, and some laboratory procedures in addition to field sampling. So section 6 goes into the data gaps and how they were addressed. This does not mean that all the data gaps have been filled. This document, the RI as a whole, actually identified additional data gaps that we'll be talking about towards the end. Section 7 is quality assurance, quality control. Good heavens, this is where your eyes will spin. This is where the data, all the data, historic and current, is scrutinized intently. Data used for Superfund sites and their investigations has to be of the highest quality, because we are talking about data that's used to interpret risk to human health and the environment. You do not want suspect data when we are talking about risk to human health and the environment. You do not want suspect data when you're going to be designing multi-million dollar cleanups. So this data is literally filtered and reviewed intensely. And that is, like I said, the lion's share of the pages in this document. Entire appendices are devoted to the data packages as well as the quality assurance, quality control. So if you guys really want to dive into it, it's there for your review, but it kind of takes an analyst to tear it apart and understand it. What it comes down to basically is after the QA/QC review, the EPA has a complete data set from which the RI is built on. Okay, so let's get on to the fun sections. Now we're on to section 8 of the RI, and section 8 describes the nature and extent of contamination. Fortunately, it is exactly how it sounds. Now what we're doing is we're taking all that data and we're plotting it on maps, and we're understanding the concentration of the contaminants in relation spatially to the tributaries and Spring River and so forth. Its nature and extent is a spatial interpretation. And I've clipped out an example of one of the many figures from this section. This is figure 8.5, and it's for Center Creek, one of the tributaries, and it shows sediment contaminant concentration. So we're looking at sediment over distance, Now let's start with the first aerial photograph up on top. And if you look in the upper right corner, this aerial photograph depicts cadmium in sediment over the course of Center Creek. So let me describe what you're looking at. Just looking at this one rectangle, look at the far right, close to Lawrence County. You'll see a little green dot. That is the upgradient location. Flow in Center Creek goes from left to right. So we're going to start at the upgradient location, that little green one that's right on the county line and on Center Creek. If you look at green in the legend for this figure, green means the concentration of cadmium in sediment at that location is below background. Well, cool. That's good news. But as you progress down gradient, the yellow circles indicate that cadmium concentrations are increasing as we go down gradient. Those larger yellow circles indicate that cadmium is now from 1 to 10 times background. Ouch, that doesn't sound good. Well, let's keep going downstream. The next location is green. Well, that's better. Good. Okay, keep going downstream. To the left of the Center Creek label, you'll see another spot that's also green. Well, that's good news too. That's below background. Okay, let's keep going down gradient. Now we're venturing into the mining district impacted areas, those tan polygons. And now you see the circles begin to dramatically change. Green is gone. We're in the yellow, orange, and red zones, and that means we're way above background, which is unfortunate. And again, this is sediment. So, okay, let's back out again. We're still looking at cadmium. Let's start up gradient. You see the green dot that we started with, progressing down to the yellows. There may be a reason for this. Contaminated sediments tend to settle and mix and settle and mix. So that may be why we went from green to yellow to green. But what ultimately happens in Center Creek is that contamination prevails, unfortunately, and gains. And so we see increasing concentrations as you progress down gradient. Now that's cadmium. If you look at the next in the center, that aerial photograph, we're looking at lead. And if you shift your eyes back and forth between cadmium and lead, you're looking at a very similar footprint. So that is the relationship of these mine-related contaminants. They co-occur, and so you will see similar footprints like this. If you look further down, I cropped out zinc. I apologize because of the title, but zinc shows the same footprint, okay? So this is nature and extent. When you get into chapter 8, you'll find numerous figures like this that repeat over and over again, contaminant by contaminant, tributary by tributary, what this looks like spatially. So there's an entire set of figures dedicated to Shoal Creek, an entire set of figures dedicated to Shawnee, and so forth. So there is a lot of data that's shown here. Now, it's important in the application. Okay, this too, I would give my chemistry students for homework and say, okay, hey, if I gave you the keys to a backhoe and you were going to clean up contaminated sediments and you had Center Creek, where would you start? And, you know, they're going to be eager, young environmentalists. They're going to scoop the whole place up, by God, and it's going to be clean. Well, I said, okay, wait a minute, you're paying for this out of your pocket. Oh, all of a sudden the conditions change. So if I gave them the keys to the track, all of a sudden their approach to cleaning contaminated sediments would be focused on the left side where the higher concentrations occur. What I just did with my students is in essence what we're going to do with the data. We're going to look at it closely to understand which portions of what creeks are lending the contamination, because that's where the remedy needs to focus. Let me show you another example. This is also a figure that was taken out of section 8 describing the nature and extent of contamination. And it's like, oh, good heavens, Carmen, more data, you're killing us. I know, but I'm an educator. I'm hoping I can impart some knowledge to you as far as what you're looking at, because the RI has oodles of these figures, just a ton of them. So I want you to be able to look at the data yourself and be able to understand it. So let me just walk you through one as an example. And hopefully you can take it home. Like I said, it's a homework assignment. When you crack open the RI, you can understand some of the information that's there. Okay, this graphic, like I said, the sampling is robust. It's huge. There are so many samples that have been collected that the EPA and others had to apply statistics to make the data, get our arms around it, so to speak. So you're looking at what is called a box and whisker plot, and it depicts the data for a given drainage statistically within a pattern. So let's start on the left side with the light blue dots. What we're looking at is zinc. And we're looking at zinc in floodplain soils. And those blue dots, if you look on the bottom, are associated with floodplain soils in Center Creek. And each blue dot is a data point. There were 101 samples collected for Center Creek floodplain soils. And for us to understand what did all that information mean, the concentrations are put on this graphic so you can see trends. And so what you're looking at, that box captures what is called central tendency of the data, where the data wants to lie. And what it means is, do you see the dashed dark line behind it that's roughly below a value of 1,000? That's the background threshold. So we want to be behind that, or excuse me, we want to be below that dashed line. And looking at Center Creek, it's all of those blue dots, a considerable portion of them is above background. That's not very good. Look at Shawnee Creek, which is the green dots to the right. Not very many samples. There's only 10 samples, that's true, but they all occur below that black dashed line. Well, that's good news. I mean, Shawnee Creek, the concentrations of zinc in floodplain soils are below background. Okay, well, that's a good story. Let's keep moving. Shoal Creek, pink, kind of pinkish. We got some points that are above background. We got some points that are below. Its central tendency is around background. Okay, well, that's not bad. Short Creek, ouch, all that red. Goodness, all of it, almost all of it above background. Spring River, fortunately, central tendency is around background. The box is kind of centered around the background value. Turkey Creek, ouch. Data is again fairly distributed above background. So I would show this to my students and say, all right, give me the keys to that backhoe again. Which creek are you going to go after? Short Creek kind of bubbles to the surface. Turkey Creek, perhaps a close second. Spring River, oh, it's okay. Center after that. But I'm just walking you through a decision process. I'm showing you how the EPA and others take the data, plot it on graphics such as this so they understand, if asked the decision, if you were to go out and to clean something up, where would you start? Well, this graphic indicates zinc in floodplain soils identifies Short Creek as a problem. Okay, now the RI does provide over and over again many of those figures. That was just one example. So I am at your disposal. If you want to trudge through data to understand how to interpret that stuff, I am glad to answer the phone. So hopefully
Carmen,
I didn't
excuse
lose
me.
you. Yeah.
Carmen, Elizabeth Kramer's raising one point about something that you said earlier. Just make sure we're on the same page regarding this. We heard you state that Center Creek flows from left to right, but she was thinking that you meant right to left. Is that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm
All right.
sorry.
All right.
Yep.
So flow at Center Creek, it's right to left
Right to
into the
left.
Spring River. There we go. Okay. All right. That's all. All right. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Apologize for that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we've gotten through to section 9, which is contaminant fate and transport. And I had mentioned conceptual site model before. You've probably seen this figure before, but it's a wonderful diagram, picture that's trying to depict all the possible methods where the mine-related wastes can come in contact with humans and the ecology, all the possible pathways that can occur. Because the pathways of exposure are extremely important. You've probably heard that term numerous times. Exposure pathways will be analyzed in detail in the risk assessments. But Section 9, what it does is it visits all the data and it looks at those diagrams, the aerial photographs, and it checks to see if these pathways exist or if there are pathways that have been missed. And this is the conceptual site model developed for the Upper Spring River Basin right now, and like I said, what it will be used for is the risk assessments. The RI does present the results, the methods and results for the ecological risk assessments. There's an entire appendix dedicated to the detailed risk assessment. The human health risk assessment is still a work in progress, so that does not appear in the RI, but the ecological does. What the ecological risk assessment found is that there are contaminants in sediment, pore water, and surface water that do pose an unacceptable risk to survival, growth, and biomass of benthic invertebrates in the Upper and Middle Spring River Basin. Benthic invertebrates are bugs, and they're important to aquatic systems because they're food, and they're part of the entire life cycle of a healthy aquatic system. They're also perfect indicators used for aquatic toxicology because these critters burrow into sediment, and if anything happens to them, if they're affected by contamination, they demonstrate effects within a small area. So looking for bugs in sediment is almost a direct measurement of the possible impacts from contamination. So that's the ecological risk assessment. Now, this is a conceptual site model that shows exposure pathways for human health. Human health risk assessment is not in the RI, but what the RI does do is presents this figure, which depicts the exposure pathways that the forthcoming risk assessment will address. And so what this diagram does, it shows you what happens to the waste out on the site and how people can be exposed to it. So we'll start on the primary source on the left side. The source of contamination is the district operations and the mine waste that was released to the environment and has contaminated sediment, surface water, and floodplain soil. In turn, sediment, surface water, floodplain soil can accumulate into biota, for instance, like fish or bugs. It can continue and be carried in the surface water, sediment, and soil. And then these affected media represent exposure media. So let's pick on, say, Spring River. There's an area that's a good swimming hole. That would be for a person that is, if you look at the current and future receptors, a potential recreator. And so picture if you decide to go dunk into the Spring River, that you would come in contact with the surface water, you would likely come in contact with the sediment, you might accidentally ingest some surface water and sediment, and then when you jump out of the creek and you go to the shore, you will likely come in contact with the soil as well. There's all kinds of pathways by which we as swimmers in Spring Creek could be exposed. And so what you'll see under the receptor categories, those solid dots represent complete exposure pathways to be addressed in the human health risk assessment. Like I said, the risk assessment is not in the RI now, but what the document does describe is what you should be seeing in the forthcoming document. Section 11 is the summary and conclusions. It describes a summary of the nature and extent of the contamination, the fate and transport, as well as the conclusions from the ecological risk assessments. It does identify the data limitations and preliminary remedial action objectives for the upcoming remedial action. It states the data did indicate in the document that there are widespread elevated concentrations of cadmium, lead, and zinc in soils, sediment, and surface water in the Upper Spring River Basin. The ecological risk assessment shows how that sediment, pore water, and surface water within the study area do pose unacceptable risk to survival, growth, and biomass of benthic invertebrates. And due to the dynamic nature of the sediment contamination, EPA may continue with additional investigations about sediment transport to support the feasibility study activities and to address the data gaps in this report. Future data collection will be folded into separate feasibility study documents for the 3 Superfund sites that comprise the Upper Spring River Basin. Now here's a nice, tidy table that shows the conclusions from the document. So 7,000 pages worth of information and data is right there in front of you. That's the truth. You'll find this in the executive summary as well as the conclusions, but let me just walk you through it because I think it's pretty understandable and friendly to get through. So this chart, this table depicts the concentrations of the 3 contaminants of concerns, how much they exceed background by watershed or tributaries. So for instance, let's start at the top row with Spring River. There's a description of the Spring River area that we're describing. But the oranges and reds here, or excuse me, various shades of orange, if you look at sediment, you'll see that cadmium in Spring River, the maximum concentration that was observed does exceed background by basically 3 orders of magnitude, by 100 times. So cadmium is at concentrations far exceeding background in sediment in Spring River. That's what that dark color orange means. Lead and zinc are also a concern, but they're not nearly as high. They are 10 times the background threshold value. Surface water for Spring Creek, cadmium, lead, and zinc, all 3 of those exceed background by 100 times. Mine drainage areas are not as affected. However, zinc is a concern. Floodplain soils, cadmium, lead, and zinc are a concern, lead predominantly so. And the fish tissue results showed trends where cadmium and lead are pretty elevated. Zinc is also elevated, but to a lesser extent. So that's what this chart is showing you. And so as you look down to the other rows, say Cow Creek, Shawnee Creek, and Empire Lake, fortunately, the story gets a little bit better. Yes, the concentrations of these elements are still exceeding background, but not nearly as bad as Spring River, Center Creek, Turkey, and Short. But looking at this chart, again, remember the RI serves as a source of information for our next steps in the Superfund process. All this information rolls up and will tell EPA and others that, hey, where we need to concentrate includes these rivers and tributaries, such as their sediment and surface water and areas of mine drainage. So this is kind of a first cut map, if you will, of what are the problems and where to look. Section 11 is the references, and then the document provides supporting tables, figures, and appendices. The appendices include all the data, including supporting field data from the X-ray, XRF, fluorescent results, boring logs, standard operating procedures. Appendix E is the data validation reports that lend to the quality assurance and quality control. Appendix F was all the analytical data packages. You can see the raw data. Appendix G is the background threshold value files, which are probably of particular interest. Appendix H touches upon the additional data EPA collected in 2021 and 2022. And then the complete ecological risk assessment is in Appendix I. Okay, I want to pause for a second, take a breath. I can't see people, but are there any questions before we tap into the considerations that relate to Tar Creek? Did I kill you? I do that.
We're here. We were consulting among ourselves. I don't think we have any questions at this point.
Okay,
But
wonderful.
And Carmen, I also want to extend the offer to EPA if they want to add anything, any points that maybe you all think would be beneficial to cover before we move into the next section. Please do so.
I don't think we have any. Thank you, though.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. Oh, we got something coming in from Elizabeth Kramer now too. Let's. Oh. Just waiting on her to finish her chat here. Yeah. Okay. All right. Oh, okay. Let's see. Carmen, I think you can go ahead and move on to the next section.
Okay. Lovely, thank you. Okay, the next section is to trying to boil down. We have this large Upper Spring River Basin RI. What does that mean to Tar Creek? And in talking with Rebecca and recalling our previous conversations, I can't believe it's been a year since I talked to you folks. But the Upper Spring River Basin, the implications to Tar Creek, the expressed concerns I've heard from you folks include floodplain soils because, you know, those soils could transport down gradient and perhaps influence Tar Creek. So that's a possible concern. The cumulative watershed releases to Empire Lake. You know, Empire Lake represents the hydrologic endpoint to the Upper Spring River Basin. I mean, that lake takes all the receiving drainage from Spring River and all those tributaries. Well, Empire Lake is the starting point of the lower Spring River Basin, which Tar Creek is a part of. So understanding Empire Lake is of interest. And then watershed to watershed comparability of assumptions, background levels, and statistics. I mean, this is the Tri-State Mining District. The Upper Spring River Basin is linked to the Lower Spring River Basin. So we want to make sure we got apples and apples, oranges and oranges. And so I looked at the document from the perspective of understanding, well, do the background levels, are they useful to Tar Creek? You know, just making sure the methods are comparable and usable, you know, walk across the watershed, so to speak. So those were the considerations that I kept in mind when I reviewed the document. And then that led to my comments. So I was just going to get started with that unless there was anything to add to the considerations. It's quiet out there.
You're not seeing anything, Carmen?
Okay, we're gonna keep trucking along here to the comments then. My comments kind of fell into 5 categories, including acknowledgement of the Tar Creek site, some comments I had about the RI methods, comments that I observed related to Empire Lake and floodplain soils data, some consistency issues within the document, and some questions about next steps after the RI. So those are the kind of topic areas that my comments fell within. As far as acknowledgement of Tar Creek site, I mean, I understand this document is dedicated to the Upper Spring River Basin, which captures 3 Superfund sites. Absolutely, I get it. I am somewhat paranoid for consistency. Tar Creek is an element to the Tri-State Mining District, and it's only touched upon infrequently. So it would be nice if the report would continue to call out the influence of the Upper Spring River Basin and its linkage to Tar Creek. So I generated a comment to that effect. And also to, you know, create tracking, if you will. Like I said, the use of background threshold values and human health risk assessment methods, PRGs, these are all critical values and elements to the Superfund process. And, you know, I've got faith the EPA and others are keeping track and there's consistency across these watersheds. But what's nice is to see these elements in these documents to make sure there is consistency. So I created a comment. It might be useful to compile a list of thresholds such as background, and that way the community, whether they're looking at an Upper Spring River document or a lower, can see how these things compare.
Carmen, do you want to describe PRG?
Oh, sorry,
you mean by that?
preliminary remediation goal. Good heavens. Yes, PRG is a preliminary remediation goal. We talked at length last year about lead based on blood lead levels. PRGs can be targets for cleanup. So they're very important. They're human health based. And we've already done some reviews on the development of PRGs. So like I said, they're consistent and important. It would be nice to see them kind of tracked and kept so folks knew what was happening between the basins. Any questions about that?
Good so
Sorry.
far.
Okay, I speak in acronyms. I'm just so sorry. That's just how I work. Okay, my comments under RI methods. Okay, rightfully so. This document focuses on 3 contaminants of concern: cadmium, lead, and zinc. And if you recall back to those aerial photographs where we walked through from right to left on Center Creek, the transition of these elements over distance, it makes sense that we focus on those contaminants. They've proven themselves to be the drivers in this basin. Now, what I've heard from the community, not just this one, is the concern for other contaminants. It's like, well, when you guys get to the remedy, how are you going to address possible issues related to mercury? I'm just throwing examples out there. Well, what the community and others need to review or need to understand is that when a remedy is put into place, it's not selective. It's not just going to pick at the zinc sediment. It's not just going to parse out the cadmium or, the lead. When a remedy is put into place, it gets everything that's within the footprint of contamination. So some language in the document about how, yes, cadmium, lead, and zinc are rightfully the contaminants of concern. To assuage community concerns, it would be nice to hear that when the remedy is eventually developed, other potential contaminants will largely be addressed as well. So it's just helpful for the community to understand. My second bullet here under RI methods, flow. I was kind of concerned when I was reading through this document. I didn't see flow being taken into account in discussing stream sources and their possible loading of metals into receiving systems, such as in Empire Lake or Spring River. If I don't know if you can dig back into your memories, but when we had a presentation over a year ago about the sediment modeling, we were talking about streams that are the size of garden hoses versus streams that are size of stormwater drains. The streams that are the size of drains are obviously ones we need to keep our eyes on compared to the streams that are the size of garden hoses. So flow is very, very, very important when we want to understand contaminant loading and, areas that we need to focus on for cleanup. So I've got a couple comments in there about, well, this document could benefit from a little bit more envelope discussion of flow in relation to the contamination. The last bullet, community may want to ask EPA why certain media in the executive summary table, that colorful oranges chart that I showed you, indicates that floodplain soils in Empire Lake were not evaluated. So it was not clear in the RI report why this media was not addressed. Additional comments related to the RI methods, the fish tissue data. Fish tissue data can be very, very influential, very affecting, very useful, for instance, in ecological risk as well as human health risk. I had trouble understanding how the fish tissue data was used or how it would be used in the next steps towards feasibility study. I've designed fish tissue studies myself, for instance, for Rocky Flats. And when I collect a fish tissue, I go get co-located surface water, sediment, and pore water. So I can draw a conclusion about if a fish has burdened tissues of, say, lead, I want to know where it came from. Was it the surface water? Was it the sediment? Was it the food source? So I just didn't see that kind of data collected. Maybe it's in there and maybe I couldn't see it. But my question is here, what does the fish tissue mean and how will it be used to help with risk assessment and the next steps? There are wildlife studies that are referred to in this document, avian studies, birds, which is great. Again, another compelling line of evidence, but birds, as you can picture, they got large life history areas and they integrate exposure over large areas. So they can be tricky to use if you're trying to find a line of evidence for this RI. So I wasn't clear in understanding how those wildlife studies were applied. The ecological risk assessment, unfortunately, I'm an ecological risk assessor. I apologize, but I thought the conclusions should have been a little bit more definitive by drainage. It would have been nice to understand which of the drainages were the worst and by how much. I didn't see those kind of conclusions, so I put in a comment to that effect. Now, floodplain soils, let's talk about an issue that may be near and dear to the Tar Creek, the question. Empire Lake is an interesting lake. When I was talking to Rebecca, boy, there are some concerns. That lake is at capacity and affected by flooding. And it is a lake that is owned, I've got the name of the company, Empire District Electric Company. It's a hydroelectric lake, and it sounds like it's used for water storage as well. And so lakes of this kind are actively managed to retain their storage capacity, which means the sediments within them at times can be removed so that the use of the lake is held true. This lake has several uses. And so we know Empire Lake has contaminated sediments. And what is concerning is that in order for the lake to retain its use for hydroelectric and for water storage, at some point those sediments are going to need to be managed. And my question is, I hope, and I'm sure this has happened, that the agencies associated with the lake and the EPA are all communicating. I'm sure that they are. Empire Lake is on everybody's radar, but in the interest of completeness and concern, it would be nice that there's a relationship between EPA and the Army Corps and the state of Kansas to make sure if any action takes place with the lake that is coordinated so those contaminated sediments are dealt with appropriately. Additional Empire Lake floodplain soils questions. There are floodplain soils investigations in this document. They're somewhat brief, and I'm not entirely sure they capture flooding conditions. The studies are fairly dated. There is some more recent information, but if we want to characterize floodplain soils and the possible impact on Empire, it seems like that data is fairly limited. So what I'm asking here is that, is there the potential for more data? Floodplain soils was a data gap that EPA went to fulfill in 2019 through 2021. However, the data specifically for Empire Lake is still fairly limited. Let me show you what the USGS, the 2013 data results look like. I'm sorry, this is quite messy. Yet another large map with data points you can barely see, but I'm going to focus in on the data points around Empire Lake right there. So it's the same map, just I'm focusing in on it. And this is from the 2013 USGS study. The results from that study do show that there are lead concentrations above background. And the monitoring, there is a transect. If you look on that map within the brown zone, you see a T4-1, T4-2 through T4-5. Those locations showed elevated leads routinely. It is possible this is within the floodplain soils within Empire Lake. So there are floodplain issues of potential concern, and what may need to happen is some additional sampling since Empire Lake is showing flooding capacity. Here's the additional floodplain soils that were collected. Like I said, there were data gaps that the EPA found and they went out and fulfilled. But if you look on this figure for Empire Lake, there's just not that much around the lake itself. So there's a lot of good sampling in other places, but Empire Lake is still fairly limited in the information. Consistency within the document. Empire Lake is important, and it's the receiving drainage, or excuse me, the receiving system for that entire drainage system. And so to understand its uses, its designated uses, like for potable supply or for fishing or whatever, that needs to be called forth and kept in mind. The table that summarizes the various water quality designations did not acknowledge Empire Lake, so I ask that that be updated. There, I found an additional document, a historic document that might be of use to this Upper Spring River Basin, and I called it out and provided it for EPA to take a look at. It was just another historic study that the Lower Spring River Basin used, but it overlaps into the upper, so I just called it forward for EPA to consider. This document is titled as an RIFS. However, it's strictly an RI, if you were to ask me. It does a wonderful job of bringing all the data together, but it stops short in telling us, okay, what are the feasible next steps? I know there's a lot of work that's ongoing. There are pilot studies and the data is being interpreted, but I think this document should be retitled to strictly be an RI report because it just doesn't tap into feasibility studies, where we're going next as far as remedy development. Next steps after the RI, I generated a couple comments within this topic. Again, it is an RI report, and if there is a revision forthcoming, perhaps it could envelope some of the FS findings to date. You know, the pilot studies where they apply some of the data interpretation as far as feasibility studies, the data gaps, and how, for instance, the proposed sediment modeling will help with the next steps in the FS. So it just would be helpful if this document, if it truly is to be an RIFS, to be amended to include more discussion towards that end. There are data gaps, additional data gaps that EPA has identified, and it would be useful to understand when these data gaps will be filled and what the next steps are related to those. And there is proposed sediment modeling. I think sediment modeling is extremely important, valuable, and strategic for feasibility studies. The document indicates that is going to happen, and in fact, all kinds of data was collected to lend to the modeling. However, that's it. It doesn't describe anything else as to where it's going. So it kind of leaves you asking a question, what's next? So my comments are basically asking EPA, what is next? What plans to be done with this information, and how will it be used? Yay! Questions?
I have some, but I would first like to know if the EPA officials on the call have any comments.
EPA folks, do you have anything that you'd like to add or follow up on, or just any general comments?
I don't have any. I don't know if Elizabeth does or not.
We don't get a turn like this very often. What, once a year or so? So I'd really like to have some time to think about what you've just presented to us, and the list of comment suggestions. I really appreciate them. We will take them to heart. And as you've gone through this, if you thought of additional comments that you believe we should add in there, I'd like to hear that.
Okay. And Rebecca, I'm available if you've got questions, you know, to all of you. You know, you're trudging through the document, you see a graphic, you got a question, would be glad to be available to talk further. Absolutely.
If you if you look back at the whole pile of stuff you've just gone through, and if there are things that you wished you could have mentioned tonight, if you could let us know that right away.
Okay. Okay, yes.
I'd like to chime in just briefly with a procedural question. We've asked EPA to excuse themselves. They have. We're still running the recording. Do you need to, for any purposes on your end, leave that recording running? Can it be stopped at any time? And Rebecca, what's your preference about whether we continue recording? Because it'll go on Facebook. So.
I mean, for me, Martin, we were recording on y'all's behalf. So if you'd like to stop the recording now, then I'm totally glad to stop the recording. So. What do you think, Rebecca?
That's fine.
Okay. All right.
We have a guest in the room, and I'm just going to ask if Laurel has any comment from what you've just heard. You just got a big dump on you.
No, just a shout out of appreciation on how you unpacked those figures and spelling out those, not just the acronyms, but the graphs and things, I found that very useful.
Good, 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 good. I hope so. I hope I didn't lose you. I was just moving right along.
Right. So, yeah, you've given us some great tips on comments. Thank you very, very much for what you've lined out for us.
I see the recording is still going, though.
Still going? Okay, I hit stop on that. I apologize. Let's see. I'll try it again.
That's okay. And if it just has to continue through to the end, that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We can maybe trim it on our end if we need to. But if we get into anything that's particularly.
There isn't.
Yeah.
I had some comments. You may have something.
I've got a couple of questions. So.
We can probably trim it on our end too, Eric, if
Yeah,
it ends up
for whatever
running
reason,
long.
for whatever reason, it's not shutting down for me, even though I'm hitting stop. So yeah, we'll just clip it.
Okay. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Rebecca, I'll let you go first.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So really, one thing I noticed is in that summary table that you showed at the end with their findings. When I looked at the last two columns, sediment soils and floodplain soils rather, and fish tissue, what I noticed is that for those streams that had data, lead was always either in the highest classification with others or was in the highest reported level of any of the elements studied, right? That is to say, right? And you know, given that flooding is an issue for us and human consumption is an issue for us, I just wanted to sort of highlight that and ask you, do you find anything significant from a commenting perspective? Does that raise questions for you, given that we are the downstream, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a there that we might want to ask about?
Good question. Yes, you've highlighted lead is a bad actor. If you've got that in a bioavailable media, and I'm thinking surface water, and surface water is the media most likely to get to you folks, because sediment could be trapped at Empire, could be trapped above. You know, you stand a chance of not suffering too badly from sediment transport. But surface water is a possibility, and surface water can carry the bioavailable form of lead. So I'm looking at that's surface water. It is a good concern, absolutely. So what you probably would like to see, and this is where that fish tissue comment comes into play, is that, you know, they've got fish tissue in Empire. That's great. Well, let's do an analysis of that fish tissue to understand where that tissue lead came from, because what they don't have in the RI right now is they don't have any co-located surface water and sediment. And so when I looked at that fish tissue, I couldn't tell you where it came from. And that is, to me, a gap. I mean, what I would do is to capture species of fish that are bottom dwellers, and then species of fish that are pelagic, which means they're in the water column. And I would look at the different fish tissues, because the bottom dwellers will reflect the sediment quality. The pelagic fishes will reflect the surface water quality. And they may also reflect the accumulated exposure with the bugs in the sediment. So, you know, a little bit more analysis on the Empire Lake fish tissue will go a long way to help you address the lead accumulation and the possible Tark Creek transport of that surface water concern. Did I just circle around and answer your question or not?
I think so. Because I think if I'm, and let me tease this out and see if I'm understanding you. My assumption was that floodplain soil lead would come from flood deposition. That is to say, the lead in floodplain soils is most likely the result of flooding, right? As opposed to some other. Okay. And what you're really doing is taking my question and pulling it back a level to what's the source of that lead? Well, you know, where did the lead in the floodplain soil and in the fish come from? Because I think that's really the same question. Is it? Maybe no, it's not for no, it isn't. Never mind. Never mind. I just walked through it in my head. Yeah, I think you did answer my question. I think so.
I mean, we're worried about Tar Creek. Yeah, I see. You're right. I mean, we're worried about Tar Creek. And what I'm thinking loudly out of my head is that what is the contaminated media most likely to come down to you folks? It would be the surface water. You know, to a lesser extent, the floodplain soils, to a lesser extent, the sediment, because you've got Empire Lake that's capturing a large portion of it. There's a chance that some of it can get past, certainly, but it's the surface water that I would be concerned about because that can overtop the dam and head on down its merry way into the Lower Spring River Basin. So, and you've got bioaccumulative contaminants in surface water in Spring River and most of those tributaries. So it's definitely we need to keep our eyes on for Tar Creek.
Great, thank you. The other question I had is, within the RI, what do we know about the geography of the term floodplain? Right, they captured floodplain samples. Is it a fixed distance from the center of the stream bed on all streams? Is it a variable distance based on floodplain behaviors? How nuanced is that? Because I think that would be useful, maybe not for commenting, but for thinking ahead to our RI down here. Flooding is a major concern, and how that term is defined could be really critical.
That is a perfect comment. That is a perfect comment. I don't remember seeing that defined in the document. I don't. Okay. Yeah, that is a perfect, it needs to be. That is one of those common thread things that need to carry over. You're absolutely right. They use several historic studies that focus on floodplain soils. There's that 2013 USGS, and then there was a couple others. I bet you how floodplain soils is defined may vary.
Right, based on what
you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Yep. So, and I don't recall seeing that defined in the document. You may do just a quick search, and I can do a quick search too. I don't remember it being defined. That's a really good comment.
With your experience, methodologically, pretending for the moment, not so much focused on Upper Spring River, but down here in the lower where we have all these flooding concerns. Methodologically, to define floodplain in your RI in a variable way based on the study that provided the data that is classified as floodplain data, is that methodologically sound? Does that pass the smell test to you? Is that something, you know, that's common practice? What are your thoughts?
Well, common practice would say that that term is already defined and, you know, static between studies, but we don't even have that. Common practice, I don't know. I mean, you should look at those figures because the floodplain soils sampling is focused at the tributary joints. So where, for instance, Center Creek comes into Spring River, what they will have done is put a whole bunch of sampling points right there. The idea being is that when Center Creek floods and it deposits materials on Spring River, you know, capture what that flooded material looks like. So there's a method behind it. But we don't have access to the methods that were used. You know, we don't have their sampling plans, their work plans. This RI strictly says, here's the data we got from the efforts we put forward. So I don't think I can answer your question with the information we have in this document.
Sure.
Yeah.
You just said that floodplain is generally defined at the joints. Is that the intersection of two streams? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So from thinking about contaminants in the floodplain, is that not inviting confusion about what's in the soils? That is to say, we have Tar Creek and we have the Neosho. And if you're assessing floodplain contaminant loading at the juncture of Tar Creek and the Neosho, there's a whole lot of floodplain data that where people live that's being ignored and underrepresented, it seems to me.
That's true. This is ticklish because we're bridging the gap between media. I mean, there's true sediment, right? Saturated sediment in the stream bed, floodplain soils, which is semi-saturated, seasonally episodic, and then there's upland soils. So yeah, that's tricky. But okay, keep in mind where we're going with this. Okay, the human health risk assessments are going to take samples of all those and roll it into the risk assessment. So our job is to make sure that their sampling is robust enough that they captured samples at exposure areas. So we feel comfortable when they assess risk that they captured the exposure conditions. So that's what we got to keep our eyes on. How they define the media may not be too influential to the risk assessment models. We'll have to look at that too, because the exposure models, may take floodplain soils or may take sediments. Conservatively, what they should do is take the maximum hits for each media and run the models. That's just standard risk assessment process. Anyway, you bring up very, very good points. And so to carry this forward, I mean, Upper Spring River isn't your highest concern as it applies to the lower. Yeah, we got to make sure their methods are sound and true. So we just have to make sure they capture sampling in areas you're concerned about and make sure it rolls into the risk assessment.
This is part of the question I keep going back to, and that's the relationship between floodplain sediment and the scouring that happens during a flood, which rips out stored material and sends it downstream, which adds to the load.
It's concerning. And you remember the sediment modeling we had talked about? It must have been for the lower Spring River Basin. They were going to quantify sediment modeling, which sediment modeling can be run with scouring assumptions. And so once you've got in the computer, you've got this computerized model of what an entire watershed looks like, all the different flow rates for all the different tributaries and the sediment load within each. You can play with that model because now it's in a computer. And so you can tap out the flow rates to represent a flood. You could diminish the flow down to garden hose trickle and look at which flow regime causes the biggest problems. That's the power of a sediment model. Now, this document indicates they're going to do that. They're going to apply some kind of sediment loading model. This document does not describe which model or how it's going to be used or what kind of data is lending to it, but that is where they're going. So, Rebecca, in answer to your question, worrying about scouring of contaminated floodplain soils that turn into sediments down gradient, yes, it is concerning. And so they could take floodplain soils, assume them as sediment, and throw them into the model. I mean, there's no reason why you can't adjust the data and ask these what if questions. That's the purpose of a model.
Thank you.
I have a question about these models generally. We've run into them through the in dealing with the relicensing of the Pensacola Dam before FERC. And again, not a scientist, right? There's a lot I don't understand. But if we had someone who knew how to manipulate these models Is it generally speaking for EPA and Superfund purposes here, right? When this model is developed, could we get our hands on it and play with it if we had someone who knew how to do that? Or is it just for in-house use only?
No, a lot of these are public domain. I mean, the Army Corps was the primary agency that started developing these. I mean, Rebecca, you and I talked, gosh, a long time ago about these. And I think they've taken on a life of their own. So several agencies like USGS, I believe, has their own suite of models as well, different applications. The trick is, oh gosh, I wish I could run these things. But they're finicky computer models. Yes, they're public domain. You could get the model and then find an operator to run these questions. Absolutely. What I would do, and we've talked to EPA folks about this when they were proposing the sediment model, I think for the Lower Spring River, is like, hey, why don't you have a public meeting where you show us how this works? And yeah. So, I mean, because they're very compelling. They're very useful, but they're still strictly tools, okay? Please don't get hung up on the models and their functionality because it is strictly a tool. It's going to help EPA, for instance, decide, oh, okay, floodplain soils in this area are a problem. We'll focus the remedy here. It's just a tool because what will happen next is they will go out to verify these assumptions, verify these conclusions. So models are just a tool to help us get towards the answers, but just because they spit out answers don't mean they're all correct. They will have to be verified before we go out in the field. So, they're strong, they're useful, but they've got their limits, they're computers, and we'll just, verify things in the field. But yes, public domain. And USGS, I believe, have a number of operators, as does the Army Corps. I wouldn't know where to look at this point, but those are the primary agencies I'm familiar with that have them.
Okay. And generally, we ought to be able to get the assumptions they're inputting so that we can duplicate and then start from where they are with running the model and then adjust this variable, but not that variable.
Right. Yeah, you can
Because
start with this small bite size and move up. Yeah.
Because the thing that really triggered it is, Rebecca, your comment about scouring and then the notion that that will be something they will put in. Well, what happens if we change that scouring value by, say, 0.5% or something? You know what I mean? Like how does that, how small a change of changing the scouring assumption, like what's the output of that change if everything else stays the same?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if a small change in scouring has a dramatic change in expected output, then we would really want to make sure that that scouring figure is as accurate as possible, and we want to dig into it.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, and part of the data collection for this RI was geotechnical sampling because scouring is, I think it's interpreted using particle size, shear stress, and some other things. They did go out and grab samples to get real world geotechnical measurements that will lend to estimates of scour, estimates of mobility. So yeah, there's real data I think will roll into these models. As far as how influential a given variable is in the model, such as scour, what I've seen from these things is that when the model is done and gives you some answers, they'll give you a range of drift. And what that means is they'll say, oh, well, scour is very influential. And if you move it by 0.5%, the results moved by 10%. And so it gives you an idea of influence or uncertainty. Yeah,
so we don't even have to necessarily play with it. If we can just see the detailed results, then that tells us what to focus on. That's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, and that's where some remedy decisions come into play. So for instance, let's pick on scouring again. Say we got a real loose sediment or loose floodplain soils that just, fly into solution. Well, shoot, there's an easy way to remedy that. You mix it with some bentonite or, just fixate these substrates, do some armoring, and bam, you've taken care of the problem. So it's a very, very important variable. If it is that influential to the results, that tells the EPA that, hey, maybe there's something we can do to control. And there are solutions to that.
I just want to go back to this chart that you have showing, and my regret that that manganese isn't ever, and that it's also a neurotoxin just like lead is, and so you get a double whammy here. If you get that lead, you've probably got manganese. And yes, I know that you're saying is they come up with their solution, then they'll make sure they reach down and they get everything that will be of concern. But I want to tell you the one example I have that they did not do that, and that's Commerce Elementary School. When they came in and sampled it and cleaned it up for lead, they had to go back in and clean it again because they didn't work on the cadmium at that site. And cadmium levels were too high, but now they're not even recording these other levels. And so we'll never know if they got, or they're getting, or they're recording, or finding those. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, because you continue to talk with DEQ about trying to share with homeowners even just the handheld results for these other elements when they're testing their yards, and they won't do it. You know, they won't do it. They're like, no, we'll only give the final formal results. We're not going to share anything else, and it's a real shame because they could, and at least that family would know whether or not they should be concerned.
Yeah.
You know, about these other things.
Yeah. Well, you've done a wonderful job of tuning us in and helping us try to understand what we're doing.
I hope so. Yeah.
I have a question on a different matter, but
Sure.
related. I had an experience last summer, late summer, probably before fall started. I was up at Douthat Bridge, where Lytle Creek and Tar Creek meet. You've got the Admiralty Pile just to the west of Tar Creek, and there's a drainage coming off of all these chat piles that's always running down into Tar Creek just north of Douthat Bridge. And normally it's just clear water. You know, the rock underneath is stained horribly orange because of all the iron, right? Which is how we know that it's runoff from these chat piles. Well, I was there at right after the storm that broke that terrible drought that we had last summer. We had a really bad storm after weeks of no rain, right? And months of very little rain. And I went out to Douthat as the rain from that storm was just tapering off. And the runoff from the chat piles was milky white.
Oh.
It was solid milky white. It was not translucent. It was solid milky white. And there was so much of it coming off that if you turned to the south and looked at the downstream flow of Tar Creek from Douthat Bridge until it curved off in the distance, all of Tar Creek was solid milky white. And I am just really concerned because those sediment, that runoff is not getting tested at all by anyone. And if we're going to have more of these cycles of drought followed by heavy rain, you know, my thought was, my God, what load got dumped into Tar Creek in that one rain event?
But also throughout the watersheds.
Yeah, and throughout the watersheds, you amplify that, right? So my question for you folks is, with your TASC hats on, we need technical assistance about this. I don't know where to start. I don't know what the right ask is procedurally. You know, I know typically you are providing assistance with documents up for comment. This is a different kind of thing, but like nobody is measuring this. We have talked to people and talked to people, and yeah, we could go out and we could start waiting for those rain events, and we could start, but we shouldn't have to take the samples and send them in. Like EPA, Quapaw Tribe, DEQ, somebody should be testing this. And it's making me crazy because we're going to see more and more of this pattern with climate change.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, you've just highlighted a huge topic for a comment. Start breaking ground with your own comments on this document. Say, hey, we have observed directly stormwater events that reveal and yield, exhibits of contamination. Does this RI capture stormwater events that can obviously carry contamination, liberate, some dissolved phase? Form a comment that is extremely valuable. What you just said, you have observed this. And then every chance we get with the next document, where it applies, we provide a comment. I think, that EPA ORD sampling that I talked about for section 4, I think there's some flow event sampling that is in there. It's not well described, but these events may be captured by the ORD program for the Upper Spring River. Now, as far as for Tar Creek, I don't know. But this is where you folks can gain ground and, use your voice. We're getting a chance for you to formulate comments and, throw out a big question. Hey, how does this RI capture stormwater events? Period. Just as simple as that.
Okay, great. Thank you, because it's a real concern, but it happens so rarely. You can't, it's not like, you just do it once a month and you're good to go.
Right. Well, you're absolutely right.
Real targeted planning and resource investment.
But it also doesn't, they don't measure the runoff from the check piles.
Right.
That you see and out there. Yeah. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just on that note, when it comes to TASC requests, we can't collect environmental data. Like we're not permitted to do that. Like we can analyze information and so forth. So, it'd be great if we could, right? But we cannot go out there and do the samples ourselves. But I mean, we're engaged typically with you all as they center around technical documents. That's just historically how we've engaged with you all. But I think if you all identify if there is a need that still falls under the Superfund rubric that's separate from primary collection of data, right? Then you should always feel free to make those requests, right? That's just the TASC program is there, and there's not EPA won't agree to every request, right? Because it's a national program and they're looking at communities across the country and thinking about there's limited resources and so forth. So there may be projects where they're not going to agree to, right? That when it comes to a request, but you should always feel free to make the request, right?
Yeah.
Because even if it's not related to a specific document review. So we're engaged in a number of different ways at various sites, and they don't all center around documents or specific documents that are coming out for review and comment. And then second is, I guess, I would just encourage you to not hold back in just engaging, right? I mean, you probably have done it, but Sarah Goyer, she's the RPM, right, for Tar Creek, or one of them now, like that's come in recently. I guess I just wouldn't, I wouldn't delay in reaching out, right? Whether it's an email, if you got pictures or whatnot, just saying, here is my immediate, here are the immediate concerns, right? I mean, it's great to be able to incorporate this, roll this kind of concern into comments that are being submitted to EPA, right? In terms of it, there being it'll probably get elevated in terms of visibility, but I guess I just would not hesitate to be engaging, right, with EPA regarding the topic, right? Particularly Region 6. Again, you can always reach out by phone or email, right? So I just wouldn't delay it. They may not take action right away. They may have to kind of mull it over. They may have to talk with more people about how can they respond, right? But you can at least plant the seed, right? And then second, regarding the modeling, I'm not exactly sure how that would play out in a public meeting, but I guess it seems like that's another seed that you should plant, right? With them. It's like, okay, maybe you already have tried, right? And if you have, then probably a moot point. But I guess I just would, if you've asked them and they haven't responded, I'd probably ask again, right? And if you haven't asked, I'd be like, is it possible to have a meeting that would do this, right? That would showcase the modeling, that would have an operator there, that would showcase the data for the lower spring, or I mean the lower river, or the upper spring river. So I mean, I just would encourage you all to keep asking the questions, right, and explaining what you need, why it's important, and how it will be beneficial for Tar Creek cleanup or the related tri-state mining district sites.
Yep.
Thank you.
You guys are the eyes on the ground, so take pictures, send them emails. That's you're powerful, your community. So it's exactly right.
I have one more wish list. I've asked Region 6 today and for a couple of months ago for feedback on our own document. We produced a series of questions that we did as a health survey. We did it 20 years ago, and we would like to repeat it, but we want a review of the document to see if there's suggestions on how to make it more effective in getting results back that can be noted in this world. So would you consider, and would I ask if there's a possibility that you could review our health survey questions?
Wow.
I mean, it's a thing to ask.
Yeah.
Or not.
Well, I'm thinking of resources that may be available to you. I mean, would love to, Rebecca, absolutely love to, but Center of Disease Control, ATSDR, and the health departments. Gosh, there are people sitting at their desks that formulate the interviews, do health assessments. I have a feeling there's some resources that are out there for you. As far as skills within our wheelhouse, we've got a human health risk assessor here that could certainly help with that. But like Eric said, this is a request for you to pipe through to EPA for confirmation that would get to us. And I would also recommend that there are agencies, like I said, CDC, Agency of Toxic Substances, Disease Registry, and the health departments. There may be some resources available to you.
Yeah,
So,
I think part of the challenge is that our experiences with some of those agencies has been middling at best at times, and there's some challenges going on within the local health department at the moment that may or may not sort themselves out. But Rebecca, I'm thinking maybe reach out to Region 7 and say what programs exist without regard to region, and then go to Region 6 and say, I want to use this program.
Well, it's just we just have a set of questions. I just wanted to review. So
okay.
Yeah, Rebecca, I would just make the request again to Region 6. I'm not sure who you made it to. I would go to the task coordinator, and then if you're not getting feedback, then the national program heads for TASC are available on the website. Their numbers and their emails. You can give them, you can submit them, submit an email, send or make a phone call, right, and talk to them. You can even clarify that the level of effort would not be significant, right? It's just you would like outside review of your survey, of your health survey questions, right? And again, we respond if we get the direction, right? But if I'm thinking about this from a community member trying to seek out additional assistance through the TASC program, then the task coordinators by region are there on the website. And if that is not producing in terms of what you need, in terms of even getting a response, then I would go to the national program coordinators, right? So I just wouldn't, you know, if one door is not opening, then, you know, Martin was suggesting potentially Region 7. That might be the next best step, right? But I just would want to encourage you to keep going, right, with your request. And it, you know, clarifying, look, not a big level of effort, just want an outside pair of eyes to review it, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. The difficulty we had wasn't with TASC, by the way. Like, you guys are awesome. We haven't had any. Yeah.
No, I totally, I understand. Yeah, I mean, I get that and appreciate it, but you know, just like I'm thinking about the EPA side of the folks that channel the requests on the EPA side, right? And I guess I would just encourage you there to keep, you know, maybe it is Region 7 this time as opposed to Region 6, but also I would take advantage of the national program coordinators being available. Information's there on the website for them to talk to. I mean, they may just pick up the phone, right? And talk to you. So
that's great.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah. Okay.
One last thing just about the recording, Eric. Go ahead and send the full recording to us. We can trim it on our end, but having a record of our back and forth would be really valuable to us in drafting our comments.
Okay.
So I think, Rebecca, I can trim before we post it to Facebook. But I would hate to lose the recording of the conversation that we've had. So.
Okay.
This is really helpful. Thank you very much for the time you put in to help us.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Our pleasure, Rebecca, always.
Well, it was a big dump.
Yeah, what do we owe you on a per page basis?
Well, we could have gone through it page by page. No.
Yeah, I love the slides that you presented with the images. Thank you so much. They're very clear. We'll refer back to them over and over again.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Yep, this has been great. Really, really helpful.
Good.
So
glad to hear it.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Martin. Thanks to the other lead agency folks that attended tonight. Certainly appreciate it. Carmen is there. I mean, she's busy, right? But if you need to reach out, talk to her about a comment or whatnot, you know, feel free to do that.
I do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Just remember the due date for the Upper Spring RI is coming up fast, July 17th. Okay.
Yep.
I mean, I know you guys know it, but just it'll come fast, right? So, if there's anything else, definitely feel free to reach out to Carmen, Sabrina, or myself. I'll work on getting you guys the recording, and then you guys can trim it, post it, and all that. Okay.
We didn't really get to meet Sabrina.
Well, she will. You've got. Yeah. I mean, you're getting to interact with her a little bit more though, right? Because she's doing a little bit more emailing and communicating with you all, and she's been kind of behind the scenes trying to get everything coordinated with our fact sheet, the presentation, make sure everything is kind of coordinated between the fact sheet, presentation, working with Carmen to get it all kind of coordinated, worked out, etc. So she's getting the full Tar Creek experience, and by participating tonight, she's getting even a richer experience. So
yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Great to work with you guys.
Take care.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Martin. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Carmen. Thanks, Sabrina. We'll talk to you all later.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Still says that it is recording.
Every time I've tried to shut it down, it seems like I'm having an internet
Stop.
issue.